He showed up at the wedding in ragged clothes, and the guests looked at him with disdain. But when he took the microphone and began to sing, the bride froze in place. Her eyes filled with tears, and a second later she shouted out words that shocked everyone. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what city you are from. The sun dipped low, casting golden hues across the small, cozy home where the soft sound of a guitar filled the air. James sat by the window, his fingers dancing gently over the strings as his daughter Amara curled up beside him, her wide eyes sparkling with joy. The melody he played was one he had written just for her, a lullaby born from the deepest corners of his heart. Each night, it was their ritual, the music, her tiny voice humming along, and the warmth of their shared world. Her head rested against his arm, and he felt her small heartbeat, steady and safe. The room smelled of lavender and the sweet remnants of the pie his wife, Lina, had baked earlier. This was happiness, pure and simple, and James cherished it more than anything. Music was not just James's profession, it was his soul. He taught at the local elementary school, where children loved him not only for his talent but for his patience and kindness. He believed music could change lives, could bring light where there was darkness. He often stayed after school to give free lessons to children whose families couldn't afford them. His dream was to one day open a music center for underprivileged kids, a place where they could find their voice the way he once found his. Yet no audience, no applause, brought him joy greater than singing with his little girl. Amara, only 6 years old, already showed a natural gift for music. Her laughter blended with his chords, and he imagined a future where they would share stages and songs forever. Though their life was modest, it was rich with love. The roof needed fixing, and bills often piled up, but these were worries for another time. James and Lina believed that as long as they had each other, they had enough. The only cloud in their sky was the time James spent away from home. Between teaching, side gigs, and late-night sessions, his hours with Amara felt too brief. He promised himself he would change that, one day soon. The night it all shattered was like any other. James had played his final notes, kissed his daughter goodnight, and set out for a charity concert across town. He often performed at fundraisers, blending his love for music with his desire to help others. The rain started as a soft patter against his windshield, and he turned the radio low, humming along as the wipers beat a steady rhythm. The road was slick, the streetlights blurring into amber streaks. He was thinking of Amara, picturing her face as she had sleepily whispered, "Sing me our song when you get home, Daddy." He smiled, his heart full. The sudden glare of headlights, the screech of tires, and the deafening crunch of metal ripped through the night. His car spun, the world a blur of glass and pain. When the chaos settled, there was only silence, broken by the distant wail of sirens. James lay motionless, his body battered, his mind slipping into darkness. His last thought before the blackness took him was of Amara's voice, her sweet song unfinished. The hospital lights were harsh and cold when he finally opened his eyes, his body screaming with every breath. Machines beeped, and faces he didn't know loomed above him. His chest felt heavy, his mouth dry, and when he tried to speak, no words came. Days bled into each other as he drifted in and out of consciousness. The doctors told him he had survived a severe car accident. The impact had caused trauma to his head, and he had been in a coma for weeks. But worse than the pain was the confusion. His mind was a fog, his memories shattered. They asked for his name, and he could not give it. They asked about his family, and his heart ached without knowing why. He felt the emptiness where something precious should be, but he couldn't reach it. The nurses began calling him James after a fragment he had murmured in his sleep, and the name felt both foreign and familiar. They searched for his family, but no one came. There were no identification papers, no phone, no one claiming him. The doctors said his amnesia might fade with time, that memories often returned in pieces, but days turned to weeks, and weeks to months, and nothing returned except for a melody, a soft, haunting lullaby that circled his mind endlessly. He did not know why it brought him comfort, or why it made his chest ache with longing, only that he could not stop humming it. When his body healed enough for discharge, there was nowhere for him to go. The hospital, burdened with unpaid bills and no insurance, could do little more than release him. They offered him numbers for shelters, a pat on the back, and distant well wishes. He stepped out into the world with nothing but the clothes they had given him and the song that never left his lips. The city felt vast and merciless. The streets became his home, the pavement his bed, and the sky his only roof. Hunger gnawed at his belly, and cold pierced his bones. People passed him without seeing him, their eyes slipping past as if he were invisible. He begged, he wandered, and he learned the language of survival, the places to find food, the spots to sleep without being harassed. But through every bitter day and frozen night, he kept singing. The lullaby was his companion, his only tether to something he felt he had lost. Sometimes, as he played his song on the street corners with a battered guitar he had scavenged, a child would pause, their eyes wide with wonder, and for a fleeting moment, warmth would flood his chest. He didn't know why their small faces stirred something deep within him, something raw and painful. But always, always he played on. Far away, in a home he could no longer remember, a little girl named Amara clung to a memory. She would often sing a lullaby to herself, the one her father had taught her, because somehow it made her feel less alone. Each night, she whispered into the silence of her room, "Come home, Daddy," believing with all her heart that he would hear her. And somewhere, across the distance and the years, James kept singing. He did not know who he sang for, only that the song had never left him. The wind cut through his thin jacket as James wandered the streets, his steps aimless and heavy. The pavement was his path and the sky his ceiling, the unforgiving city stretching endlessly around him. Hunger gnawed at his ribs, and cold settled into his bones, a constant ache that no amount of shivering could chase away. Each day blurred into the next, a hollow routine of searching for scraps and shelter. He would wake from uneasy sleep beneath overpasses or in doorways, his body stiff from the concrete's chill, and begin again, a cycle of survival that felt endless and inescapable. People rushed past him, their faces turned away as if he were part of the scenery, something to be stepped over or ignored. At first, he tried to ask for help, his voice raw and uncertain, but the stares of disgust and the cold refusals taught him silence. They did not see him. He had become invisible. The cruelty of the world pressed hard against him. On a night when the rain poured mercilessly, soaking through his clothes and leaving him trembling, he sought shelter beneath the awning of a closed cafe. He was barely there for minutes when the owner appeared, his face twisted with disdain, and drove him away with curses, as if James's presence alone had stained the place. Once, in a moment of desperation, he reached for a half-eaten sandwich discarded in a trash can, and a passer-by sneered, "Filthy beggar," the words striking harder than any fist. Yet it was not only cruelty that made the streets unbearable. It was the indifference. The thousands of faces that passed him, never meeting his eyes, never acknowledging he existed. But he endured. He discovered that the city, harsh as it was, had its hidden rhythms. He learned which shops threw out unsold food in the early mornings and which public libraries would let him sit for a few hours without forcing him out. He found corners of the park where he could sleep without being harassed. Yet the nights remained his enemy, long and merciless, filled with cold and fear. Sleep was shallow, broken by the threat of theft or violence. More than once, he woke to find his meager belongings taken. The coat he had scavenged, the few coins he had collected. Once, a group of young men found him dozing in an alley and beat him for sport, leaving him bruised and bleeding. As he lay on the ground, the taste of copper in his mouth, he wondered if this was the end, if anyone would notice or care if he simply never rose again. But he did rise, because something inside him refused to stop. The only thing that brought him peace was music. He found an old guitar, its strings rusted and body cracked, abandoned near a dumpster. His fingers, though stiff from cold, remembered how to play, and the sound that emerged was rough but true. The guitar became his companion, a piece of himself he hadn't lost. He played on street corners and subways beneath bridges, his voice joining the chords and songs that seemed to rise from the depths of his soul. Strangers sometimes dropped coins into an old coffee cup beside him, but the money was secondary. The music was his refuge, and in his repertoire, one song returned again and again, the lullaby he could not remember writing but could never forget playing. It was his comfort and his torment, filling his heart with an ache he did not understand. It felt like a memory trying to surface, a name on the tip of his tongue that would not come. Sometimes children stopped to listen, their eyes wide and their heads tilting in curiosity. Once, a little girl with braids stood transfixed, her hand tugging at her mother's sleeve. "Mommy," she said softly, "I know this song." The mother hurried her along, but James's heart clenched. Who had he written this melody for? Why did it feel like he was searching for someone in every note? The winter months were the cruelest. The cold became an enemy he could not fight, seeping into his bones and making his joints stiff and swollen. He grew gaunt, his skin pale beneath a scruff of beard. There were days he felt the pull of exhaustion so deeply that he feared he would fall asleep and never wake up. Yet he played on. His music was a beacon he sent into the world, a soundless cry for someone, anyone, to find him. It was during one of those bitter days, when the sky was gray and heavy with the promise of snow, that he met a man who would change everything. James was playing near the entrance of a small soup kitchen, his fingers stiff and clumsy from the cold, his voice cracked but determined. As the final note faded, a warm voice spoke above him. "That was beautiful," the man said. "You've got real soul." James looked up to see a young man, clean-cut and dressed simply, with a smile that was warm and honest. In his hands he held 2 cups of coffee, and he offered one to James without hesitation. "My name's Eric," he said. "You must be freezing. Come inside, get something hot to eat." James hesitated. Kindness from strangers was rare, and he had learned to be wary. But something in Eric's face, earnest and open, softened the knot of distrust that had tightened over the years. His hands, shaking from cold, accepted the cup, and he felt its warmth seep into his fingers. The first sip was heaven. Eric, without waiting for thanks, simply said, "Come on, man, let's get you warm." Inside the soup kitchen, the air was thick with the scent of broth and bread. People like him filled the room, worn faces, hollow eyes, but for once he did not feel invisible. Eric stayed by his side asking nothing, offering only companionship. They talked, and James, guarded at first, found himself sharing pieces of his story: the hospital, the street, the guitar. He did not mention the song. That ache felt too private, too sacred. But Eric listened without pity, and for the first time in years, James felt seen. As the night wore on, Eric said, "You've got a gift. I can hear it. You shouldn't be out here alone. There's a shelter nearby. It's not much, but it's safe, and they could use someone who can play. Music has a way of making people feel less alone." James wanted to refuse. Pride, old and stubborn, rose up in him. He had survived on his own. But something in Eric's voice, genuine care, not charity, eased his defenses. "All right," he said, his voice hoarse. "I'll go." That night, for the first time in years, James slept in a bed. The mattress was thin and the blankets worn, but he was warm, and no one looked at him with scorn. He closed his eyes, and in his dreams he heard the lullaby again, soft and familiar, and a child's voice, sweet and clear, singing along. He woke with tears on his face and a name on his lips. He did not know who it belonged to, but he felt its weight in his chest. He stayed. Days became weeks, and James found a new rhythm, one built not on survival but on something closer to living. He played his guitar at the shelter, and for those few moments, he saw hope flicker in eyes that had long forgotten it. He helped where he could, washing dishes, sweeping floors, and mending broken things. But it was his music that healed the most, and through it all, Eric remained a constant presence. Kind, steadfast, a friend in a world that had offered him none. The world had taken so much from him, his past, his name, his place, but it had given him this, a song that would not leave him, and now a reason to sing it. He did not know that his music, carried through the cold winds of time, was already calling someone home. The winter was loosening its grip when James began to feel something he hadn't known in years: stability. The shelter wasn't much, a large room with rows of thin cots, the air heavy with the scent of old blankets and soup, but it was a sanctuary. For the first time since the hospital, he slept without fear of being attacked or frozen to death. Days passed with a gentle rhythm, mornings filled with the clatter of breakfast trays, afternoons spent helping the volunteers, and evenings when his guitar brought warmth to the cold, cavernous space. The others in the shelter grew used to his music, and soon they began to gather when he played. For a few moments, their weathered faces softened, their tired eyes closed, and, in the melody, they found something rare: peace. Through it all, Eric was there. He was more than a volunteer. He was a constant presence, a friend who never asked for anything in return. Eric was younger, probably in his late 20s, with a quick smile and a voice that carried warmth. He ran errands, served meals, and listened, really listened, to the stories of those society had cast aside. But he never made them feel like charity cases. To Eric, they were people. It was a rare thing, and James felt it keenly. He wasn't sure when it had happened, but he had begun to trust the man, something he hadn't done with anyone in years. They often sat together after the dinner rush, sharing coffee in chipped mugs. James talked more than he ever thought he would, about his music, his lost years, the hospital. The only thing he kept close to his chest was the lullaby. That piece of him felt too fragile to share, a thin thread connecting him to something he couldn't quite reach. One evening, as James finished a soft, mournful tune, Eric clapped quietly from his seat. "You could play anywhere," he said, his eyes bright with conviction. "People would pay to hear you." James shook his head. "It's not about that. The music, It's the only thing that feels like home. I don't know why, but it's like I'm singing for someone. I just don't know who." His voice cracked and he looked away, embarrassed. Eric didn't press. He only said, "Maybe one day they'll hear you." The days turned into weeks, and James became part of the shelter's lifeblood. He wasn't just a guest, he was a giver. He helped fix broken furniture, played for the newcomers, and found himself caring, really caring for people again. He saw himself in their faces, the lost, the forgotten. But he also saw resilience. There was a man named Harold, a former accountant who taught others how to manage what little money they made. There was Denise, who, despite living on the streets, had a heart big enough to mother everyone in the room. And there was Eric, the man who made it all possible. James learned that Eric wasn't paid for his work. He had a day job, though he rarely spoke of it, and he spent his free time here because he believed in giving people dignity. His passion was magnetic, and James found himself inspired by it. For so long, he had thought survival was enough. Now, he saw that living meant more than that. Then came the night that would change everything. The shelter was hosting a small fundraising event, a simple affair with paper lanterns and a makeshift stage. Eric had asked James to perform. At first, he had refused, uneasy with the attention, but Eric's quiet encouragement won him over. "Play," he had said, "because your music can reach people in ways words can't." When James stepped up to the microphone, his hands trembled, but as his fingers met the strings, the world fell away. He played with his whole soul, his voice raw with truth. The room, filled with people from all walks of life, volunteers, donors, and the homeless, fell silent, united by his song. And when he finished, the applause felt like something more than praise. It felt like belonging. Afterward, Eric approached him, his face glowing with pride. "You've got something special, James. I'm telling you, you could change lives with that music." James felt a warmth he hadn't known in years. "Maybe I already am," he said softly, looking around the room where strangers felt like family. As the night wound down, James caught Eric on his way out. "Why do you do all this?" he asked, curious. "You could be anywhere, doing anything. Why here?" Eric smiled a little wistfully. "Because everyone deserves a second chance. Someone gave me mine once, so I try to pass it on." James didn't press further. He knew a guarded past when he saw one. But something in Eric's answer stayed with him. That night, as he lay on his cot, he felt something stir, a flicker of something he couldn't name. He still didn't know who he was beyond the man he had become here, but he knew this. He was more than what the world had taken from him, and maybe, just maybe, he was on his way to finding what he had lost. He fell asleep to the sound of his own heart, steady and sure, and in his dreams the lullaby played softly. And somewhere, across the threads of time and memory, a little girl's voice hummed along. The morning sun streamed through the lace curtains, casting soft patterns across the wooden floor. Amara stood before the mirror, smoothing the fabric of her wedding dress, her reflection capturing a mixture of joy and something quieter, an ache that she carried close to her heart. The dress was elegant but simple, just as she had wanted. She traced the delicate embroidery with her fingers, and for a moment she saw not the bride-to-be, but the little girl who used to dance in front of her father's guitar, twirling in pajamas and singing to the song he wrote just for her. The memory brought both warmth and longing. She had dreamed of this day since she was a child, but always with one image at its heart, her father walking her down the aisle. That part of the dream had been taken from her years ago, but the ache never truly faded. The preparations for the wedding had been both exciting and exhausting. She and Eric had spent months carefully planning everything. The venue was a charming old garden estate with towering oaks and winding stone paths. Flowers, soft whites and blush pinks, would frame the altar, and the scent of blooming roses would carry through the evening air. They had chosen a live band to play during the reception, and Amara had already imagined their first dance, the moment when the world would narrow to just the two of them. But, as perfect as everything seemed, something felt incomplete. She had shared her heart with Eric about it more than once. I always thought my dad would be here for this," she had confessed to him one night, her voice thick with unshed tears. "I know it's been so many years, and I know I should have moved on, but it still feels wrong without him." Eric had pulled her close, his voice a steady comfort. "I know, my love. If I could bring him back for you, I would. But I promise, he's here in every part of you, and I'll stand beside you through every step." Her heart had swollen with love for Eric. He understood her grief without trying to fix it, and that meant more to her than any perfect ceremony. She loved his kindness, his generosity, the way his heart always reached for those in need. She had met him through his volunteer work, helping at a local shelter. His dedication to lifting others up had been what first drew her to him, and, in time, it became one of the many reasons she knew she wanted to spend her life with him. The final days leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of details. The flowers, the seating charts, the final fittings, all of it rushed by, and Amara barely had time to breathe. Then, the day before the wedding, everything came to a halt with a single phone call. The band, their carefully chosen live performers, had been grounded at the airport. A storm had caused their flight to be canceled, and there was no chance they would arrive in time. Amara's heart sank. "What do you mean they can't come?" she asked, the panic rising in her voice. "Tomorrow is the wedding. There has to be something you can do." But the answer was final. No band, no music. The first dance she had dreamed of since childhood. Gone. She ended the call with her stomach in knots. Her friends tried to console her. "We could make a playlist," one of them offered. "We'll hook it up to the speakers. You'll still have music." Amara tried to smile, but her voice cracked. "I know. It's not the same." She felt the tears threaten and turned away, brushing them aside before they could fall. It wasn't about the band. It was about the feeling, the heartbeat of the night. When Eric found her later, sitting alone on the balcony, he sat beside her and took her hand. "I know this isn't what you imagined," he said softly, "but this wedding isn't about the music or the flowers or any of that. It's about us, and nothing can take that away." She looked at him, seeing the truth in his eyes, and some of the tension in her chest eased. "You're right," she whispered. "As long as we're together, it's all that matters." But Eric couldn't shake the feeling that she deserved more. He knew how much music meant to her, how deeply it connected her to the father she had lost. And though he couldn't bring back the band, he felt a determination burning inside him. There had to be something he could do. That evening, while out with his groomsmen for a quiet bachelor's gathering, Eric heard something that stopped him in his tracks. The sound floated through the cool night air, raw and rich with feeling. A voice, a guitar, and a song that felt like it carried a soul's entire journey. He turned the corner and saw a man, worn by life, playing on the sidewalk. His clothes were old and frayed, His hair streaked with silver, but his music was pure. And within it, Eric felt something more than talent. He felt heart. The song ended, and Eric stepped forward, his voice careful but warm. "That was incredible," he said. "What's your name?" The man looked up, his eyes shadowed but kind. "James," he answered, his voice low and weathered. "You've got a gift, James," Eric said. I don't know if this is crazy, but I need someone to play at my wedding. Our band canceled, and I think your music is exactly what the night needs. Would you?" James studied him, his fingers still resting on the strings. "A wedding," he echoed softly, as if tasting the word. His gaze held something distant, something private, but then he nodded. "All right, I'll play." Eric smiled, the knot in his chest loosening. "Thank you. You've just saved our night." James returned the smile, but as Eric turned to leave, he felt something stir, something he couldn't name. Weddings, music, an ache, old and familiar, brushed against his heart. But he shook it off and focused on the guitar in his hands. The next morning, as the sun rose on what would be the most important day of his life, Eric made the arrangements. He didn't tell Amara about the change. He wanted it to be a surprise, because something in his heart told him that this man's music wasn't just a performance. It was a story waiting to be heard. And perhaps, without knowing it, he had found the perfect voice to complete the song of their lives. The wedding day dawned beneath a sky brushed with soft morning gold, the air filled with the promise of something unforgettable. Amara awoke to the quiet rustle of wind through the trees, her heart a steady flutter of excitement and nervous anticipation. It felt surreal that the day had finally arrived. Her friends buzzed around her, fixing her hair, adjusting her veil, their voices a melody of joy and laughter. Yet, beneath it all, Amara felt the familiar ache, the absence of the man who should have been by her side. She pressed her hand to her chest where a locket, containing the only picture she had of her father, lay warm against her skin. "I hope you're watching, Daddy," she whispered softly. "I hope you can see me." The garden estate was alive with beauty, the archways adorned with white roses and trailing ivy, the chairs dressed in soft linen, and the air sweetened by blooming jasmine. Guests arrived in clusters, their voices a low hum of excitement. Eric stood near the altar, his suit crisp, his hands clasped tightly together. He scanned the crowd, his heart racing, not just from anticipation, but from the surprise he had arranged. He had not told Amara about the musician he found. He wanted the music to be a gift, something that would reach into her heart and make her feel the presence she missed so deeply. The ceremony passed like a breath held in time. Amara, radiant and trembling, walked alone but with a grace that made the entire world still. When their vows were spoken, when Eric whispered, "Forever," and she answered, "Always," the world around them seemed to fade, leaving only their hearts entwined. Applause, soft and warm, greeted their kiss, and they stepped together into the first moments of their new life. As the sun dipped lower, casting the sky in amber and rose, the guests moved toward the reception area, where the dance floor awaited beneath strings of glowing lights. Amara, still glowing from the ceremony, turned to Eric with a small, playful frown. "You never told me," she said softly. "Did you figure out the music?" Eric's eyes sparkled with something she couldn't quite place. "I did," he said simply. "I wanted to surprise you." And then the first notes began, soft, rich, and pure. Amara froze. Her breath caught in her throat as a guitar, raw and familiar, spoke into the air. It was not just any song, it was her song, the lullaby, the one her father had played for her every night until the day he disappeared. Her eyes snapped to the stage, and there he stood, a man with lines of life and loss etched into his face, his clothes plain and worn, but his hands brought the guitar to life with a tenderness that made the world disappear. His voice, when it joined the strings, was deep, roughened by time but filled with something raw and unbreakable. Amara's heart pounded, her vision blurring with sudden tears. She felt the ground shift beneath her. Her voice broke into a whisper, disbelief and hope tangling. No, it can't be. The guest, charmed by the music, swayed, unaware that the earth had stopped for the bride. Eric felt her body tense beside him, heard the change in her breath, and his heart thudded. "Amara," he said softly, "what is it?" Her lips trembled. She didn't tear her eyes from the man on the stage. "That song," she said, her voice fractured by wonder, "that's my father's song. He wrote it for me." Eric's breath caught. The world seemed to shrink around them both. "Amara," he began, his voice tight with sudden realization. "The man playing, I met him last night. His name is James." But she was already moving. The music reached a fragile peak, a crescendo woven from longing and love. Amara stepped forward, her steps quickening, her heart a wild drumbeat. She came to the edge of the stage, her voice shaking as she called, "Sir, please." James's fingers faltered, the notes shivering into silence. His eyes lifted from the strings, and they met hers. For a heartbeat, the world stood still. He saw her face, her eyes wide and wet with tears, her lips parted as if a question hovered there, unspoken but deafening. And then something broke inside him, a crack in the fog that had shrouded his life. Her face, so familiar, so painfully familiar, hit him like a wave. His chest tightened, his breath catching on a name he hadn't spoken in what felt like a lifetime. And then, without meaning to, he sang the next line of the lullaby. Her lullaby, the line he had always ended with when he tucked his little girl into bed. Amara's lips moved, her voice barely a whisper as she echoed the line. The same line. The room fell away, the guest forgotten, the music a bridge that spanned across years of darkness. She stepped forward, her voice breaking. "Daddy?" The guitar slipped from James's hands, the strings protesting with a hollow clang. His knees weakened, his face crumpling, his eyes wide and drowning in recognition. The wall of lost time, of broken memory, shattered in an instant, and everything flooded back. The hospital, the endless streets, the years of searching without knowing who he was searching for. But above all, the tiny face he had kept locked in his heart through every frozen night, every lonely song. His voice broke from him raw and shattered. "Amara?" The silence was deafening. The guests stared, bewildered, but none of it mattered. She was already running, her gown whispering against the floor, and then she was in his arms, her sobs breaking free as he clutched her with a desperation that shook his entire body. "Daddy!" she cried against his chest, her voice shattered and whole at once. "It's you. It's really you." James's tears fell freely, his voice rough with love and regret and every word he could not say. "My baby girl. I found you. I never stopped looking. His voice failed, and he only held her tighter, as if he could reclaim every lost second through the strength of his embrace. Eric stood frozen, his heart thundering with the impossible truth unfolding before him. And then, slowly, he stepped forward, his voice thick with emotion. "James," he said softly, the name now carrying the weight of something sacred. "She's my heart. She's—" James's eyes met his, and understanding passed between them, a connection forged not only by fate, but by love. His lips trembled as he whispered, You brought me back to her." Eric's throat closed with emotion. "No," he said quietly. "You found your way back. Through her." The reception had fallen silent, but now it was a silence of awe. Eyes glistened with tears as the guests, strangers to the story, but witnesses to the miracle, felt their own hearts tremble. And then the applause began. Not for a performance, but for something far greater. For a father and daughter, torn apart by life, and reunited by the song that had never stopped singing between their souls. The world felt impossibly small, as if it had folded in on itself to hold only the two of them, father and daughter, lost and found. Amara clung to James with all the strength her body could summon, her tears soaking into his worn jacket, her heart racing so fast it felt as if it might burst. She was afraid to let go, afraid that if she did, he would vanish like a dream upon waking. But his arms around her were real, strong, trembling, and real. She felt his chest heave with every ragged breath, heard the stutter of his heart, and it was the sound of home. Her voice, broken by sobs, rose into the air. I thought you were gone forever. I thought I'd lost you." James's voice was rough with the edges of years spent in silence, but it carried all the tenderness of a father who had dreamed of this moment through every lost night. "I never meant to leave you," he said, his voice breaking. "I never stopped loving you, Amara. Not for a second. His throat closed, his body shaking as the weight of all he had lost and all he had found crashed over him. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, his voice splintering into the air. "I'm so sorry I wasn't there." Amara pulled back just enough to see his face, her hands cradling his weathered cheeks, her fingers brushing against the lines time had carved into his skin. "You're here now," she said fiercely, her eyes blazing through her tears. "That's all that matters. You're here." The guests stood frozen, their whispers a low hum of wonder and confusion. But Eric felt his chest ache with something deeper, something sacred. His hands trembled at his sides as he stepped forward, his heart hammering. "James," he said softly, and the older man's tear-soaked eyes lifted to meet his. I had no idea," Eric continued, his voice tight with emotion. I found you last night, and I knew your music belonged here. I didn't know it would bring you home." James's lips quivered, and he reached a hand toward Eric, his voice rough with gratitude and something more. "You," he managed, "you brought me back to her. You gave me back my daughter." His voice cracked, and then he was embracing Eric, holding him as a man holds a person who has unknowingly saved his soul. "Thank you," James said, the words hoarse and full. "Thank you for loving her." Eric's throat was tight, his own eyes burning. "She's my everything," he answered softly. "And now she has everything." A voice broke through the stunned silence, a voice raw and familiar. "James?" Amara turned sharply, her breath catching as her mother, Lena, stepped forward from the crowd, her face pale, her eyes wide with disbelief in something deeper, hope, fragile and trembling. She pressed a hand to her mouth, her voice shaken as she whispered, "James, is it really you?" James's body seemed to still, his breath shallow. His eyes found her, and for a moment he was a younger man, seeing his wife across the years, across every lost second. "Lena," he breathed, her name a prayer, a wound, and a promise all at once. He stepped forward, his voice unsteady. "It's me," he said, his throat thick. "It's me. I never stopped loving you." Her body trembled as she closed the distance, and then they were in each other's arms, her tears falling freely as she clutched the man she had mourned. the man she had tried to let go of and never could. "I thought you were gone." She wept against him. "I thought you were gone forever." James's arms held her as if he could piece together every broken moment, every year they had lost. "I was," he whispered hoarsely, "but I found my way back. I found you." Amara stood beside them, her heart full beyond what her body could hold. She reached for them, and together they became what had been torn apart, whole again, broken pieces made beautiful by their reunion. The guests, now understanding the miracle unfolding before their eyes, began to clap softly. The applause grew, but it was not for the music. It was for something far greater. It was for love that had survived the impossible, for a family shattered and made whole, for a story that had found its ending and its beginning. Eric, standing beside them, felt his heart swell with something he couldn't contain. He had dreamed of making this day special for Amara, but he had never imagined that it would become something sacred, something touched by fate itself. He felt Amara's eyes on him then, and when he met her gaze, he saw everything he had ever wanted, ever needed, in the depths of her tear-streaked face. She crossed to him, her hands finding his, her voice a whisper. "You brought him back to me." Eric's voice, thick with emotion, answered simply, "I just followed the music. Your heart did the rest." James, his voice still broken but filled with something that sounded like hope, spoke softly. "No," he said, his eyes meeting Eric's, and there was something fierce and grateful and raw in his voice. "You didn't just follow the music. You became it. You brought me back to my family. And now, you are my family." The applause, the murmurs, the sounds of the world beyond their moment, all of it faded, leaving only the heartbeat of something whole, something healed. The song had brought them together, but it was love, unbreakable, timeless, that would carry them forward. And in the air, as if the world itself remembered, the melody of a lullaby seemed to linger. The echoes of the wedding night lingered like a soft warmth in the air, but by morning, reality arrived in waves, gentle, profound, and full of the weight of everything they had found and everything they had lost. Amara woke to a golden spill of sunlight across her pillow, her body still heavy with the emotions of the night before. For a moment, she lay still, her heart beating softly against her ribs. Then the memories came. The music, the moment, the face she had dreamed of for so long. Her father. She sat up abruptly, the sheets slipping from her shoulders as her breath quickened with the rush of joy and disbelief. He was here. He was real. In the soft quiet of the morning, she found James sitting on the terrace, his guitar across his lap, his fingers hovering above the strings but unmoving. The early light touched the silver threads in his hair, and for a moment she saw both the man he had become and the man she had never stopped remembering. She stepped outside, the boards cool beneath her bare feet, and when he turned at the sound, his face softened into something so tender it nearly broke her. "Good morning, sweetheart," he said, his voice low and rough, as if testing the fragile newness of the word on his tongue. She crossed to him, and he set the guitar aside to take her hands in his. She felt the calluses on his palms, the wear of years of hardship, but within them the same gentleness she remembered. "I thought last night was a dream," she whispered, her voice unsteady. His thumb brushed over her knuckles, a familiar gesture from a lifetime ago. "So did I," he said softly, "but if it is, it's the only dream I never want to wake from." She sank beside him, and they sat together in the soft hush of the morning. The questions lay between them, heavy but patient, and when she spoke again, her voice was small, uncertain. "Where Where have you been, Daddy? What happened to you?" His eyes clouded, and she felt the tremor in his hands before he withdrew them to fold in his lap. He began, but the words seemed to fight him. He pressed his fingers into his knees, and his voice broke on the edges of memory. "I don't know how to explain it all. For so long, I didn't know who I was. After the accident, I woke up with nothing. No memory, no name, just a song. I didn't even know why it mattered, but it was all I had." He paused, his throat working against the emotion rising there. "I searched, even when I didn't know what I was searching for. I played that song on every street corner, hoping someone would know it, would know me. But no one ever did." His voice cracked, and he turned to her with eyes that burned. "Until you." Her hands found his again, and she squeezed hard, as if through touch she could anchor them both. "You found your way back to me," she said softly, her voice thick with tears. "Even when you didn't know how. You never stopped playing, and I never stopped listening." He reached up, brushing a tear from her cheek with the back of his roughened finger. "I've lost so many years," he said, his voice low with sorrow. "Years I should have spent watching you grow. Years I can never get back. But if you'll let me, sweetheart, I want to be here now. I want to know the woman you've become." Her answer was the soft, fierce embrace that closed the space between them. "You're here," she whispered into his shoulder. "That's all I've ever wanted." The day passed in a current of emotions, tears, laughter, stories both shared and missed. Lena joined them, and for the first time in years, the three of them sat together, the fractures of their family mending with every word spoken and every silence shared. Amara watched her mother's face, saw the echoes of both joy and grief. The joy of a husband returned, the grief for the time they could never reclaim. But beneath it, something more, a kind of peace that could only come from the breaking and the healing. Later, when the sun dipped low, casting the sky in hues of fire and rose, Eric found James sitting alone, his guitar once again cradled close, his fingers strumming softly as if coaxing his thoughts into sound. Eric hesitated, then stepped forward, his voice warm but careful. "Mind some company?" James looked up, and a small smile touched his lips. "Never." Eric sat, the silence between them easy, filled with the soft murmur of strings. After a moment, James's voice broke the stillness. "I owe you more than I can ever say," he said, his eyes on the horizon. "You didn't just marry my daughter, you brought her father home." Eric's voice was steady but filled with something deep. "You were always on your way back to her," he said. "I just helped the music reach her ears." James's fingers paused, his eyes turning to meet Eric's. "You didn't just help. You became part of the song, your family to her, and now, to me." His voice softened, weighted with emotion. "Thank you for giving her the life I couldn't." Eric's throat tightened, and he found his voice low and firm. "She is my life," he said simply, "and so are you, James. We're family now, and family doesn't leave anyone behind." The chords resumed, a melody warm and rich, and without needing to say it aloud, both men knew they were no longer strangers. They were something far more. When night fell and the stars stretched across the sky like scattered notes on a sheet of music, James found his way to the heart of the shelter that had kept him alive for so long. The place where he had learned to live before he remembered who he was. He stood in the doorway, his eyes sweeping the familiar faces, people who had become his second family through the hardest years of his life. Harold, Denise, and others paused their quiet conversations, their eyes lifting in recognition and curiosity. James's voice, though low, carried across the room with a strength that no longer wavered. "You've all given me more than I could ever repay. You gave me a home when I had none, a place to belong when I didn't know where I came from, and now—" His throat caught for a moment, but he pressed on. "Now I've found my family, but I will never forget the family I found here, and I promise you I won't leave you behind." There was no applause, only something deeper, something that filled the room and settled into the bones of everyone who heard it. A vow made not from duty, but from love. James stepped forward, his guitar slung over his shoulder, and when he played, he did so not as a man lost, but as a man found. The lullaby that had carried him through the darkest years of his life became something more than memory. It became a promise. And in the faces before him, faces lined with struggle but alive with hope, he saw his own reflection. The music soared, and through it, James told them his story. A story of loss and love, of darkness and light, of being broken and becoming whole. And as his daughter and his son-in-law stood beside him and his wife watched with eyes full of pride, he knew that the song, the one he had carried for so long, had finally reached its final, perfect chord. But beyond that chord was something even more powerful. A new beginning. The days after the wedding unfolded like a soft, golden sunrise, slow and full of promise. James stayed close to his family, his heart still tender with the wonder of being with them again. Every morning felt like a miracle he couldn't quite believe. The scent of coffee drifting from the kitchen where Amara and Lena laughed softly together. The warm sound of Eric's voice discussing plans for the day. The soft padding of bare feet as his daughter joined him on the porch, where they shared moments of quiet and music. The cracks in his life, years of loss and wandering, were still there, but now they had been filled with something stronger than time. They had been filled with love. But James knew he could not live in the sweetness of reunion alone. His heart, long weathered by hardship, carried with it a purpose he could not ignore. The streets had taught him too much, and the faces he had known, Harold, Denise, and so many others, were still with him. He could not simply walk away from them. He would not. He had found his family, but he had also found his calling. He shared his heart with Amara and Eric one evening, his voice steady but full of something deep and urgent. "I've spent so many years surviving," he said, "but those years weren't just about me. They were about the people I met, the people who saved me when the world had forgotten I existed. I can't turn my back on them now. I don't want to. I want to give them something more than a song. I want to give them a chance." Amara's hand found his, her eyes shining with both pride and understanding. "Then let's do it together," she said softly. "You taught me, Daddy, that music is about connection. Let's use it to change lives." Eric, his voice firm with the certainty that had always defined him, added, "You're not alone in this, James. We'll build something together, something that lasts." It began with a dream and a simple idea, a place where the forgotten could be seen, where the lost could find their voices. Together they planned a center, part shelter, part music school, part home. A place where people could come not only to be fed and housed, but to learn, to create, and to heal. A place where music, the thread that had bound James to his family through the darkest years, could become a lifeline for others. The work was hard and the road uncertain. Funding was scarce at first, and there were days when it felt as though their vision might never break beyond the walls of their dreams. But James knew hardship. He knew how to fight through it, and he was not alone. Eric reached out to his network. Amara poured her heart into the project, and James did what he had always done. He played. He played on street corners, not for survival now, but for a cause. His guitar case, once a desperate plea, became a vessel for hope. He told his story with every chord, and the world began to listen. People stopped, not only to hear his music, but to hear him, his journey, his loss, his return. News spread, and soon their dream began to take shape with hands and hearts beyond their own. Donations trickled in, then poured. Volunteers arrived, driven by the story of a man who had found his family and now sought to create a family for others. When the center opened, it was far more than a building. It was a heartbeat. The doors welcomed those the world had tried to forget, the lost, the struggling, the broken. Harold became their guide in teaching practical skills, while Denise, ever the nurturer, brought warmth to every corner. But it was music that became the soul of the place. James taught anyone who wished to learn, his classroom filled not only with chords and scales, but with stories and hope. He taught the language of strings to calloused hands, the rhythm of healing to broken hearts. And when he played not as a man who had been shattered, but as a man made whole. His lullaby, the song that had carried him through every dark night, became the anthem of the center, a melody of both loss and love. But now, when he sang it, he did not sing alone. Voices joined him. Children and adults, young and the old, voices rough from hardship and bright with hope. It was no longer a song of searching, it was a song of home. Amara stood beside him often, her voice blending with his, and every note they shared felt like a promise. And Eric, his steadfast presence, the foundation beneath it all, worked tirelessly not only to keep the center alive, but to expand its reach. Together, they became more than a family. They became a force, one born from pain, but carried forward by love. In time, the center became a beacon. Stories of lives changed began to ripple outward, of the child who found her voice in a choir, of the man who learned to write his first song and, with it, found his first hope, of the woman who had spent years in silence and finally spoke through the strings of a guitar. And always, at the heart of every story, was James, his music, his heart, his unbreakable belief that every lost soul had a song waiting to be heard. Years passed, but some things never faded. The bond between James and his family only deepened, each day a treasure, each shared song a memory written into their hearts. Lena, once widowed in spirit, lived again with a heart full of love, watching her husband not only return to his family, but to the world. And Amara and Eric, building a future on the foundation of their love and shared purpose, continued the work hand in hand with James. And James, through it all, never stopped playing. Not on stages built for applause, but in rooms filled with the kind of silence only music could heal. His life, once a song of loss, had become a symphony, layered, rich, and filled with harmony. And on the days when the air was still and the light was golden, if you stood outside the center and listened closely, you could hear it. That old, familiar lullaby, but it was not a song of longing anymore. It was a song of belonging. A song that, at long last, had found its way home. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt tales. Share this video with your friends and family to spread the message of hope and love. And be sure to check out our other videos. You never know which story will touch your heart next. Thank you for watching.